The rain had stopped an hour ago, but Elena still felt cold to her bones. She stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, watching people rush past her like she was invisible. Maybe she was. When you're homeless, people learn to look right through you as if you're made of glass. Her stomach twisted with hunger. 2 days. That's how long it had been since she'd eaten anything more than half a sandwich she'd found in a coffee shop trash can. She wasn't proud of that, but pride doesn't fill an empty stomach. She shifted her backpack on her shoulders. Everything she owned was in there. 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, underwear, socks with holes in them that she kept meaning to throw away but couldn't afford to replace. And tucked carefully in the front pocket, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was her father's metronome. The only thing she had left of him. Elena looked up at the restaurant in front of her. The Golden Leaf. Warm light spilled out onto the sidewalk, and through the tall windows she could see people laughing, eating, living their normal lives. The kind of life she used to have. 3 months. That's how long she'd been on the streets. 3 months since her stepmother had finally done what she'd been planning since the day Elena's father died. Changed the locks, packed Elena's things in garbage bags, left them on the porch with a note that said she was 18 now and it was time to make her own way. Elena had tried. God, she had tried. But without an address, she couldn't keep her scholarship. Without her scholarship, she couldn't stay in school. Without school, she had nowhere to go. It was like falling downstairs, each step taking her lower and lower until she hit the bottom. But tonight, something inside her had cracked. Maybe it was the hunger. Maybe it was the memory of her father that had been haunting her all day, or maybe she was just tired of being invisible. She could see the piano through the window, a beautiful black grand piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant, probably there just to look expensive. Most restaurants like this had pianos they never used, just for decoration. Her fingers tingled. She hadn't played in months. Couldn't. There was no piano in the subway station where she slept. No piano in the library where she spent her days trying to stay warm. But she remembered. Every note, every piece her father had taught her. They lived in her fingers, waiting. Elena took a breath and pushed open the door. The warmth hit her first, then the smell. Fresh bread. Roasted chicken. Butter and garlic and herbs. Her mouth watered so badly it hurt. The restaurant was full of people in expensive clothes. The kind of people who didn't have to worry about where their next meal would come from. Every head turned to look at her. She felt their eyes on her worn coat, her taped-together shoes, her hair that she'd tried to wash in a public bathroom sink that morning. Their expressions changed from curiosity to something harder, judgment, disgust, the kind of looks that said she didn't belong here. A thin man in a perfect black suit appeared in front of her. His name tag said Bernard, and his smile was the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. "I'm sorry, miss, but we have a dress code." His voice was polite, but his eyes were cold. Elena's heart pounded. She almost turned around and left. Almost. But then her stomach growled so loud she was sure he could hear it, and something in her refused to give up. "I want to make an offer," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I can play your piano. During dinner. For the guests. In exchange, could I have a meal?" Bernard's eyebrows went up, then down. Then he laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "You want to play? In exchange for food?" He didn't bother lowering his voice. The people at the nearest tables were already listening, leaning in to hear better. This was entertainment for them. "A show. I'm really good," Elena said quickly. "I studied music." "I can play anything you—" "I'm sure you think you can," Bernard interrupted. "But this is a fine dining establishment. We're not a soup kitchen, and we certainly don't let street musicians perform for scraps." A man at a nearby table called out, "What's she going to play? Chopsticks?" His friends burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that cut like knives. A woman wearing diamonds that probably cost more than Elena's entire life whispered to her companion. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Can you imagine? The nerve. Anyone could walk in off the street and claim they can play piano. Elena felt her face burning. She wanted to run, wanted to disappear, but something her father used to tell her echoed in her mind. "Stand tall, little bird. Your gift is real, even when people can't see it yet." "Just one song," she said, looking Bernard straight in the eye. "If I'm not good enough, I'll leave. You don't have to give me anything. Just let me play once." Bernard opened his mouth to refuse, but a voice from behind him stopped him cold. "Let her play. A heavy-set man in a chef's coat had emerged from the kitchen. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp as they studied Elena. There was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. Curiosity, maybe? Or a test? "Chef Laurent, you can't be serious," Bernard protested. "She's obviously just—" "I said let her play." The chef's voice had steel in it. "One song. Then she leaves quietly. Clear the piano." Bernard's jaw tightened, but he nodded stiffly and gestured toward the piano. Elena walked through the restaurant on shaking legs. She could feel every eye on her, could hear the whispers following her like shadows. "This should be good," someone muttered. "I give her 30 seconds before she gives up," another voice said. "Does she even know how to play? Or is this some kind of scam?" Elena reached the piano and sat down on the bench. Her hands were trembling. The keys looked perfect, clean, probably tuned regularly even though no one ever played them. Such a waste. Such a beautiful waste. She closed her eyes and let her fingers hover over the keys. It had been so long. What if she'd forgotten? What if her fingers didn't remember? What if she humiliated herself in front of all these people and proved them right? Then she thought about her father, Victor, the greatest pianist she'd ever known. He died when she was 16, his heart giving out after a lifetime of giving everything to his music. She remembered sitting beside him at their piano at home, his hands guiding hers through difficult passages, his patient voice encouraging her when she wanted to give up. "Music lives in your heart, Elena," he used to say, "not in your circumstances, not in your bank account, not in what people think of you. In your heart. And no one can take that away unless you let them." She opened her eyes and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's prelude in C-sharp minor filled the air. Her father's signature piece. The piece that had made him famous. The piece he'd played at Carnegie Hall the night she was born. And as the dark, powerful chords rolled through the silent restaurant, Elena forgot about the hunger, the cold nights, the cruel stepmother, the lost dreams. There was only the music, only her father's memory, only the gift he'd given her that no one could steal. Behind her, the laughter had stopped. The whispers had died. Every person in that restaurant had frozen, forks suspended halfway to mouths, wine glasses held in midair, conversations forgotten. Elena played, and for the first time in 3 months, she felt like herself again. The music poured out of Elena like water breaking through a dam. Her fingers moved across the keys with a life of their own, remembering every note, every nuance her father had taught her. The opening chords of the Rachmaninoff piece were thunderous, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. She didn't see the restaurant anymore. Didn't see the people staring. In her mind, she was back in the living room of her childhood home, sitting beside her father at their old upright piano. She was 12 again, struggling with this exact piece, frustrated because her hands were too small to reach the massive chords. "Don't fight the piano, little bird," her father had said, his accented voice gentle. "Let it speak through you. Feel the sadness here, the longing. This piece isn't about power. It's about heartbreak." Now she understood. Every note carried the weight of loss. Her father's death, her stolen home, the 3 months of cold nights and empty days. It all flowed through her fingers into the music, transforming pain into something beautiful. The technical part of her brain registered how good the piano was. Perfectly tuned, responsive, the kind of instrument that cost more than most people's cars. Under her hands, it sang like it had been waiting for someone to finally play it properly. The brutal middle section came with cascading runs that would make most pianists nervous. Elena's fingers flew across the keys without hesitation. Muscle memory took over. The same passages she'd practiced 10,000 times in her father's studio. Under his watchful eye, his metronome ticking steadily in the background. She could feel tears on her cheeks but didn't stop to wipe them away. The music demanded everything from her, and she gave it. Every ounce of grief, every moment of hunger, every night she'd cried herself to sleep on a subway bench. It all went into the piano. Behind her, the restaurant had gone completely silent. Not a fork moved. Not a glass clinked. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen, standing in the doorway with stunned expressions. Bernard stood frozen near the entrance, his mouth slightly open. The smug certainty had drained from his face, replaced by something like shock. This wasn't what he'd expected. None of them had expected this. The man who'd made the joke about chopsticks had gone pale. His friends weren't laughing anymore. They sat rigid in their seats, eyes fixed on Elena's back, suddenly aware that they'd mocked someone extraordinary. The woman with the diamonds had tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, her hand pressed to her chest. Her companion had forgotten about his $50 steak, his fork hanging limply in his hand. Chef Laurent stood at the kitchen door, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes never left Elena. He was seeing something, remembering something, and his jaw was tight with emotion. Elena moved into the final section, the peace building toward its devastating conclusion. Her whole body swayed with the music, her father's teaching coming back to her. Play with your whole self, not just your fingers. Let the audience see your soul. She'd been embarrassed when he said things like that when she was younger, thought it was too dramatic, too much. Now she understood. Music wasn't just sound. It was communication at its deepest level. It was saying things that words could never capture. The final crashing chords rang out through the restaurant, powerful enough to rattle the wine glasses. Then Elena lifted her hands from the keys and the sound faded away, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. She kept her head bowed, hands resting on her lap, not ready to turn around, not ready to face whatever came next. Her heart hammered in her chest. What if they still told her to leave? What if even this wasn't enough? Then someone started clapping. It began with one person, slow and deliberate. Then another joined in. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Not polite golf clapping, real applause, the kind that comes from deep in the chest, the kind that says something has genuinely moved you. People stood up from their tables, some of them wiping tears from their eyes. Others were clapping so hard their hands had to hurt. A few were shouting bravo and incredible. In voices choked with emotion, Elena finally turned around on the piano bench, overwhelmed and confused. She'd expected silence at best, maybe a quiet dismissal. Not this. Never this. The man who'd mocked her earlier stood with his napkin pressed to his mouth, his face red with shame. He wouldn't meet her eyes. His friends looked equally uncomfortable. Their earlier laughter turned to ash in their mouths. The woman with diamonds was openly crying now, her makeup ruined, and she didn't seem to care. She was clapping harder than anyone, her jewelry flashing under the restaurant lights. Chef Laurent pushed through the crowd, moving toward the piano with purpose. His expression had changed. The tiredness was gone, replaced by something urgent, almost desperate. Where did you learn to play like that? He demanded, but his voice wasn't angry. It was shaken. Who taught you? Elena's throat felt tight. My father taught me. Your father? The chef's eyes narrowed, studying her face more carefully now. What's your last name? Chen. The word came out barely louder than a whisper. A woman at a corner table gasped. She was elderly, probably in her 70s, dressed in an elegant dark dress that spoke of old money and good taste. She'd been sitting so quietly, Elena hadn't noticed her before. Now the woman stood up, one hand gripping her cane, the other pointing at Elena with a trembling finger. Dear God, the old woman breathed. Laurent, look at her face. Really look. The chef stared at Elena, and she watched his expression change as pieces fell into place. His eyes went wide. His face went white. No, he whispered. It's not possible. What's not possible? Elena asked, confused and frightened by the intensity of their reactions. The elderly woman made her way toward the piano, moving slowly but with determination. She had the kind of face that had been beautiful once and was still striking now. Her white hair perfectly styled, her posture straight despite the cane. You played it exactly as Victor played it, the woman said, her voice shaking. Every phrasing choice, every dynamic. The way you leaned into the fortissimo sections, the rubato in the middle passage. I heard him play that piece at Carnegie Hall 20 years ago, and I've never forgotten it. She stopped right in front of Elena, looking down at her with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. You have his eyes, his cheekbones, the same mouth. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. You're his daughter, aren't you? You're Victor Chen's child. The restaurant went silent again, but this time it was different. This time it was the silence of shock, of people realizing they'd witnessed something impossible. Victor Chen. The name rippled through the crowd in whispers. Those who knew classical music recognized it immediately. Those who didn't were getting urgent explanations from their companions. One of the greatest pianists of his generation, a virtuoso, A legend. Dead for 6 years now. Elena couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She nodded, tears streaming down her face harder now. But that's impossible, Bernard said from near the door, his voice weak. Victor Chen's daughter would be at a conservatory. She'd be famous by now. She wouldn't be. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at Elena's worn clothes, unable to finish the sentence. Wouldn't be what? The elderly woman's voice cut through the room like a blade. Homeless? Is that what you were going to say? Bernard's face went red, but he had no answer. The woman turned back to Elena, her expression softening. Child, what happened to you? Where have you been? Chef Laurent pulled out a chair from the nearest table. Please sit. Someone bring her food now. He wasn't asking. He was ordering, using the voice of a man who'd spent 30 years commanding a kitchen. A waiter rushed off toward the kitchen. The chef knelt down beside the chair so he was at Elena's eye level. His expression had completely transformed. I saw your father perform 3 times. The last time was 8 months before he died. He was magnificent. He paused, swallowing hard. I had no idea he had a daughter. Most people didn't, Elena said quietly. My stepmother made sure of that. The old woman pulled up another chair, sitting down heavily. Your stepmother? You mean Elena Volkov? Just hearing that name made Elena flinch. You know her? Everyone in the classical music world knows her. Or knew of her anyway. She attached herself to your father in his final years. We all wondered about her, but Victor seemed happy, so we said nothing. The woman's jaw tightened. We should have said something. A plate appeared in front of Elena. Roasted chicken with vegetables and potatoes, steam rising from it, the smell so good it made her dizzy. For a moment she just stared at it, unable to believe it was real. Eat, Chef Laurent said gently. Please, then you can tell us everything. Elena picked up the fork with shaking hands. Elena forced herself to eat slowly, even though every instinct screamed at her to devour the food in front of her. Her stomach had shrunk over the past 2 days, and she knew if she ate too fast, she'd make herself sick. But God, it was hard. The chicken was perfectly cooked, tender and seasoned with herbs she couldn't even name. The vegetables were buttery and warm. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. The elderly woman sat beside her, patient and quiet, letting her eat. Chef Laurent had pulled up a chair too, along with several other people from nearby tables. They'd formed a small circle around her, giving her space but clearly waiting to hear her story. Bernard had disappeared somewhere, probably hiding in embarrassment. The restaurant had started to buzz with conversation again, but it was different now, quieter, more respectful. People kept glancing over at Elena, their expressions no longer mocking but curious, sympathetic, even ashamed. Take your time, the old woman said softly. My name is Beatrice, by the way. Beatrice Kwan. I was a soprano back in my performing days. I sang with your father once at a benefit concert in Boston. That was a long time ago. Elena swallowed a bite of chicken, I remember. He had a recording of that concert. He used to play it for me. Said it was one of his favorite performances. Beatrice's eyes glistened. Did he really? Elena nodded. He said you had the purest high notes he'd ever heard. Like bells in winter. A tear slipped down Beatrice's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, smiling. Your father was always kind with his words. Too kind sometimes. Her expression hardened, which is why that woman was able to take advantage of him. Tell us what happened, Chef Laurent said gently. If you can. If it's not too difficult. Elena set down her fork. Her hands were steadier now, her stomach starting to feel full for the first time in days. She looked around at the faces watching her. These were strangers. They didn't owe her anything. But something in their eyes made her feel safe enough to speak. My father died when I was 16, she began. Heart condition. He'd had it for years, but he never let it slow him down. The doctors told him to stop performing, to rest, but he couldn't. Music was his life. He said he'd rather burn out than fade away. Her voice cracked. He got his wish? Beatrice reached over and squeezed her hand. I'm so sorry, child. My mother died when I was 4. I barely remember her. So when father died, it was just me and Elena Volkov, my stepmother. The name tasted bitter in her mouth. He'd married her 2 years before he died. I never understood why. She wasn't warm. Didn't love music. Didn't really seem to love him, honestly. But he was lonely, I think. And she was beautiful and young and paid attention to him. How long after he died did things change? Chef Laurent asked. Immediately. Elena's voice went flat, remembering. She was sweet to me at the funeral, held my hand, told me we'd get through it together. But as soon as the lawyers finished reading the will, everything changed. My father left everything to her. The house, his money, his investments. He'd made the will right after they got married, probably never thought to update it. There was a trust fund set up for me, but I couldn't access it until I was 25. That's 7 years away, Beatrice said, her voice sharp with anger. 6.5 now. Elena corrected, but yes, Elena controlled everything until then. And she made it clear I was a burden she didn't want. She paused, taking a sip of water that someone had brought her. The memories were harder than she'd expected. She'd tried not to think about those first terrible months after her father's death, tried to push them down and ignore them, but now they came flooding back. At first she was just cold, distant. She moved into my father's bedroom and packed up all his things, threw away his sheet music, donated his clothes, sold his piano, the Steinway he'd played on for 20 years. She sold it to some collector for half what it was worth just to get rid of it. Several people around the table made sounds of distress. To musicians, selling a beloved instrument was almost like selling a family member. She told me I was wasting my time with music, that I'd never be as good as my father, so why bother trying? She pulled me out of my music lessons, said they were too expensive, wouldn't let me practice, wouldn't even let me keep my father's metronome. Elena's hand instinctively went to her backpack. I stole it back before I left. Good, Beatrice said fiercely. You should have taken more. I wish I had. I wish I'd taken his recordings, his photographs, anything. But I was 16 and grieving, and she was an adult, and I didn't know how to fight her. Elena's throat tightened. She homeschooled me for the next 2 years. Barely taught me anything. I think she wanted to keep me isolated. Keep me from talking to anyone who might ask questions. My father's friends tried to reach out at first, but she told them I was having a hard time, that I needed space. That contact with his old life was making things worse. We should have pushed harder, Beatrice said quietly. We should have known something was wrong. How could you have known? She was clever about it. She didn't hit me or starve me or anything obvious. She just made me feel small and worthless every single day until I almost believed her. Elena wiped at her eyes. The day I turned 18, she told me it was time for me to leave. She'd already packed my things, changed the locks. She said I was legally an adult now and she had no obligation to take care of me anymore. That's not true, Chef Laurent said. Your father's will must have made some provision for you. It did, the trust fund. But Elena said I couldn't live in the house while I waited for it. Said I needed to learn to stand on my own feet. She gave me $2,000 and told me to make it last. Elena laughed bitterly. $2,000 in New York City. It lasted 6 weeks. Where did you go? Someone asked from the edge of the circle. I had a scholarship to a music conservatory. Full ride. I'd gotten it the year before my father died. Elena couldn't take that away from me, at least. So I went there, tried to make it work. I rented a room in a shared apartment with 3 other students. But the $2,000 ran out faster than I thought. I couldn't afford food. Couldn't afford the subway to get to classes. I tried to get a job, but between classes and practice time there were no hours left. She took a shaky breath. I started missing classes because I was too weak from not eating. My playing suffered because I was exhausted all the time. My grades dropped. And then I lost the scholarship. Without that I couldn't afford anything. I couldn't pay rent. My roommates kicked me out. I tried calling Elena, begging her for help, just a little money to get back on my feet. She laughed at me, said I needed to learn responsibility. The anger in the room was palpable now. Several people were crying. Others looked furious. Beatrice's hand was gripping Elena's so tightly it almost hurt. That was 3 months ago, Elena continued. Since then I've been sleeping in subway stations, in libraries during the day, in parks when the weather was warm enough. I tried shelters, but they were full most nights. And the streets aren't safe for a young woman alone. You're 21 years old, Chef Laurent said, his voice rough with emotion. You should be finishing school, building a career, living your life, not fighting to survive on the streets. I know. Elena felt the tears coming again and didn't try to stop them. I know what I should be, but I don't know how to get there from here. I've applied for jobs, dozens of them, but without an address, without clean clothes, without references, no one will hire me. I've tried social services, but the waiting lists are months long. I just wanted to eat. That's all I wanted tonight, just one meal. I thought maybe if I played well enough, someone would take pity on me. This isn't pity, Beatrice said firmly. This is justice. You're Victor Chen's daughter. You're a brilliant pianist. And you've been robbed of your birthright. Chef Laurent pulled out his phone. I'm calling my brother. He's a lawyer, specializes in estate law and fraud. If what you're saying is true, if Elena Volkov cut you off from your inheritance illegally, he can help. I can't afford a lawyer, Elena said helplessly. You don't need to. He owes me about a dozen favors. The chef was already dialing. And besides, any lawyer worth his degree would take this case just for the principle of it. Beatrice stood up, leaning on her cane. Tomorrow morning, you're coming home with me. I have a guest room. You'll stay there until we figure this out. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. Beatrice's voice left no room for argument. I should have looked after Victor's daughter 6 years ago. I'm not making that mistake again. Elena looked around at all these faces, these strangers who an hour ago hadn't known she existed, who had mocked her and dismissed her and looked through her like she was nothing. Now they were offering her help, offering her hope, offering her a way forward. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. 6 weeks had passed since that night at the restaurant, and Elena still couldn't quite believe her life had changed so completely. She sat in the waiting room of a law office on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, watching the city spread out below her through floor-to-ceiling windows. From up here, the streets where she'd slept looked tiny and far away, like they belonged to someone else's life. Beatrice sat beside her, elegant as always in a navy dress and pearls. The old woman had been true to her word. She'd taken Elena home that very night, shown her to a beautiful guest room with clean sheets and a soft bed, and told her she could stay as long as she needed. That first night, Elena had cried herself to sleep, but they were different tears. Relief, disbelief, hope. The door to the conference room opened, and Chef Laurent's brother stepped out. His name was Theodore, and he was everything Elena had imagined a high-powered lawyer would be. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of confidence that came from winning cases for 20 years. But when he smiled at her, his expression was kind. We're ready for you, he said. Elena Volkov just arrived. Elena's stomach dropped. She'd known this moment was coming. Theodore had filed an emergency petition with the court 3 weeks ago, claiming fraud and elder abuse in Victor Chen's estate. The evidence had been damning. Forged signatures on documents. Money transferred out of Victor's accounts in his final weeks when he was too sick to notice. Witnesses who testified that Elena Volkov had isolated Victor from his friends and manipulated him into changing his will. But knowing she'd have to face her stepmother in person was different than thinking about it abstractly. Elena's hand started to shake. Beatrice squeezed her arm. You don't have to do this alone. We're right here with you. She can't hurt you anymore, Theodore added. Remember that. She has no power over you now. Elena nodded and stood up, smoothing down the simple black dress that Beatrice had bought for her. She'd tried to refuse the clothes, the food, the kindness, but Beatrice wouldn't hear it. Your father was my friend, she'd said firmly. Taking care of his daughter is an honor, not a burden. They walked into the conference room together. It was large and intimidating, with a massive table and leather chairs. Elena Volkov sat on the far side, her lawyer beside her. She looked exactly as Elena remembered, beautiful in a cold way, with sharp cheekbones and perfectly styled blonde hair. She was only 38, just 16 years older than Elena, young enough to be mistaken for an older sister rather than a stepmother. When Elena walked in, Elena Volkov's eyes narrowed. So, the prodigal daughter returns. Ms. Volkov, Theodore said crisply, I'd advise you to refrain from speaking to my client directly. Your client. Elena Volkov laughed, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. She couldn't even afford dinner 3 months ago, and now she has a lawyer? Let me guess. She played the sob story, and you all fell for it. The only story here is the one told by the financial records, Theodore said, sliding a folder across the table to her lawyer. Bank statements showing systematic theft from Victor Chen's accounts. Forged documents claiming he authorized the sale of assets. Testimony from his doctors that he was heavily medicated and confused in his final weeks, in no state to make major financial decisions. Elena Volkov's lawyer, a thin man with glasses, opened the folder. His expression grew more troubled with each page he turned. He leaned over and whispered something to his client. She shook her head sharply. "Victor wanted me to have everything," Elena Volkov said, her voice rising. "He told me so. He loved me." "Then why did you forge his signature on 7 different documents after he died?" Theodore asked calmly. "Why did you sell his piano, his manuscripts, and his personal effects within a week of his funeral? Why did you cut his 16-year-old daughter off from her inheritance and throw her out of her home the moment she turned 18? She was old enough to take care of herself. I gave her money to start with." $2,000, Elena said quietly. It was the first time she'd spoken since entering the room. "You gave me $2,000 and told me never to contact you again." Elena Volkov's eyes flashed. "You were ungrateful, spoiled. You thought you were special because Victor treated you like a princess. But you were nothing. Average talent at best. He wasted years trying to turn you into something you could never be." The words hit like physical blows, but Elena held her ground. She'd heard these insults before, had them hammered into her head for 2 years after her father died. But now with Beatrice beside her and Theodore fighting for her, they didn't have the same power. Average talent. Beatrice spoke for the first time, her voice cutting through the room like ice. "I suppose that's why the Dean of Juilliard called me yesterday, asking if the rumors were true, asking if Victor Chen's daughter was really alive and looking to resume her education. They're prepared to offer her a full scholarship, full room and board, a stipend for living expenses." Elena's head whipped around. "What?" Beatrice smiled. "Did I forget to mention that? I spoke to some old friends. Word has gotten around about what happened to you, about that performance at the restaurant. Someone filmed it on their phone, you know, posted it online. It's been viewed 3 million times. 3 million? Elena felt dizzy. "The classical music world is small," Beatrice continued, still looking at Elena Volkov. "Everyone knows everyone, and everyone knew Victor Chen. When they found out what you did to his daughter, well, let's just say you're not very popular right now." Elena Volkov's face had gone pale. "You can't prove any of this. It's her word against mine." "Actually," Theodore said, "we have quite a bit more than that. We have the testimony of Victor's doctor, who says you refused to let him see Victor in his final weeks. We have statements from the cleaning lady who worked in your house, who overheard you on the phone discussing how to hide assets. We have emails you sent to Victor's accountant, instructing him to transfer money to offshore accounts. You weren't as careful as you thought." The lawyer beside Elena Volkov whispered urgently to her again. This time she slumped back in her chair, the fight draining out of her. "My client would like to discuss a settlement," the lawyer said. "I'm sure she would," Theodore replied. "Here are our terms. You will return all assets from Victor Chen's estate to his daughter. The house, the investments, the trust fund, and compensation for 6 years of stolen inheritance. You will also pay damages for emotional distress, and you will sign a confession admitting to fraud and elder abuse." "You can't make me sign a confession." "No," Theodore agreed. "But if you don't, we go to trial. And when we win, which we will, you'll face criminal charges on top of the civil judgment. Fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. You could be looking at 10 years in prison." The room went silent. Elena Volkov stared at the table, her jaw working. Finally, she looked up at Elena, and for just a moment something that might have been fear flickered in her eyes. "He really loved you, didn't he?" she said quietly. "Victor? He talked about you all the time. Your talent, your future. It was always you. Never me." Elena felt a strange twist of pity in her chest. "He cared about you too. He wouldn't have married you otherwise." "No." Elena Volkov's voice was bitter. "He married me because he was lonely and I was there. But he loved you, and I hated you for it." "So you decided to destroy her life," Beatrice said coldly, "because you were jealous of a grieving child." Elena Volkov didn't answer. She turned to her lawyer and nodded once. The lawyer sighed and pulled out a pen. It took 2 hours to hammer out the details. Elena sat through all of it in a daze, barely able to process what was happening. The house would be sold and the proceeds given to her. The trust fund would be released immediately. Elena Volkov would pay an additional $200,000 in damages, and she would sign a statement admitting what she'd done. When they finally finished, Theodore walked Elena and Beatrice out of the office. In the elevator going down, Elena finally let herself cry, not sad tears this time, something more complicated. Relief and anger and grief all mixed together. "It's over," Theodore said gently. "You won." "I don't feel like I won," Elena whispered. "I just feel tired." Beatrice put an arm around her shoulders. "That's normal. You've been fighting for so long. It takes time to learn how to rest." They stepped out into the late afternoon sunlight. The city noise washed over them, cars honking and people rushing past. Somewhere in this city, Elena had slept on cold concrete and wondered if she'd survive another day. But that girl felt like someone else now. Someone from another life. "What happens now?" Elena asked. "Now," Beatrice said, "you go back to school. You finish your education. You play piano. You build the life your father wanted for you. And if I'm not good enough?" "You are good enough." Beatrice's voice was fierce. "I've spent 50 years in music. I know talent when I hear it. You have your father's gift. Maybe you'll never be as famous as he was, or maybe you'll surpass him. Either way, you deserve the chance to find out." Elena looked up at the sky, at the buildings reaching toward the clouds, at the world that suddenly seemed full of possibility again. She thought about her father, about his hands guiding hers across piano keys, about his voice telling her she could do anything. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, I'll try." 9 months later, Elena stood backstage at Carnegie Hall, her hands trembling as she smoothed down her concert gown. The dress was midnight blue, simple and elegant, nothing flashy. Beatrice had helped her pick it out, insisting that Elena's playing should be what people remembered, not what she wore. Through the heavy curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience taking their seats. 2,000 people, the same stage her father had played on dozens of times. The same stage where he'd given his final performance, just 3 months before his heart gave out. "5 minutes, Miss Chen," the stage manager said, poking his head into the dressing room. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Her stomach was a mess of knots. What if she forgot the notes? What if her fingers froze? What if she walked out there and proved that her stepmother had been right all along? That she was just average, nothing special? A knock came at the door. Beatrice entered, leaning on her cane, dressed in a beautiful silver gown that made her look like royalty. Behind her came Chef Laurent and his brother Theodore, both in tuxedos, both grinning. "How are you holding up?" Beatrice asked gently. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "What if I mess up? What if I'm not ready?" "You're ready." Beatrice sat down beside her, taking her hand. "I've been coming to concerts at this hall for 40 years. I've heard hundreds of pianists, and I'm telling you, you're ready." Chef Laurent handed her a bottle of water. "I closed the restaurant tonight so my whole staff could come. We're all out there, front row. The restaurant that wouldn't let me through the door 9 months ago?" Elena managed a weak smile. "The restaurant where you changed all our lives 9 months ago," he corrected. "Bernard asks about you every week, you know. I think he's still ashamed of how he treated you." "He should be," Beatrice said tartly. Then her expression softened. "But he's learned. We all have." Theodore checked his watch. "The dean of Juilliard is here, so are at least a dozen music critics. This is going to be the most reviewed debut recital of the decade." "That's not helping," Elena said, her anxiety spiking. "Sorry." He smiled apologetically. "What I meant to say is that everyone out there is rooting for you. They're not here to judge. They're here to celebrate." Another knock at the door. This time a young woman poked her head in. She was Asian, maybe 25, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. "Miss Chen? I'm so sorry to bother you before your performance, but I had to tell you something." "It's okay," Elena said. "What is it?" The woman stepped fully into the room. "My name is Lisa Park. I'm a piano student at Manhattan School of Music. I saw the video of you playing at the restaurant. The one that went viral." Elena nodded. That video had changed everything. 3 million views had turned into 10 million. News outlets had picked up the story. "Homeless pianist revealed as daughter of legend." The headlines had been everywhere for weeks. "That video saved my life," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "I was about to drop out of school. My family couldn't afford tuition anymore, and I was too proud to ask for help. I was sleeping in my car, working 3 jobs, barely surviving. When I saw you play, when I heard your story, I realized I wasn't alone, and I reached out for help. The school gave me a scholarship. I'm finishing my degree next spring." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. "I'm so glad. I'm so glad you didn't give up." "I almost did. But you showed me that it's okay to ask for help. That there's no shame in struggling. That our worth isn't measured by our circumstances." Lisa wiped her eyes. I just wanted to say thank you. And good luck tonight. You're going to be amazing. After Lisa left, Elena sat in silence for a moment. She thought about that desperate night 9 months ago, walking into that restaurant with nothing but hunger and hope. She'd thought she was just trying to survive. She hadn't realized she was starting something bigger. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Elena stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but she forced herself to take deep breaths. Beatrice hugged her tightly. Your father would be so proud, the old woman whispered. I wish he could see you tonight. Maybe he can, Elena whispered back. She walked to the wings and waited for her cue. Through the gap in the curtain, she could see the audience. The front rows were full of familiar faces. Chef Laurent and his staff, Theodore and his family, her professors from Juilliard, and scattered throughout the audience, people she'd never met who'd followed her story, who'd donated to the scholarship fund she'd started for homeless music students, who'd sent letters of encouragement during her darkest days. The house lights dimmed. The audience quieted. The announcer's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Carnegie Hall. Tonight, we have the extraordinary privilege of presenting the debut recital of Elena Chen, daughter of the late Victor Chen. Ms. Chen's journey to this stage has been remarkable, and we are honored to share this evening with you. Applause filled the hall. Elena closed her eyes and thought about her father. She could almost hear his voice. Stand tall, little bird. Let them see your soul. She walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright but not blinding. The piano gleamed under the spotlights, a magnificent Steinway, the same model her father had played on. She'd practiced on this exact instrument for the past month, learning its quirks and responses, making it her own. Elena sat at the bench and adjusted her position. The audience went completely silent. She could hear her own heartbeat, feel the blood rushing in her ears. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She'd chosen her program carefully. First, the Rachmaninoff prelude that had started everything, then a Chopin nocturne, delicate and haunting, a Beethoven sonata, powerful and emotional, and finally a piece her father had written, a short composition he'd never published, something he'd played for her when she was a child. The music flowed through her fingers like water, like breathing. She wasn't thinking about technique anymore, wasn't worried about making mistakes. She was just playing, letting the music say everything she couldn't put into words. She played about the loss and the grief, about the cold nights and the hunger and the fear, about the kindness of strangers who became family, about justice and second chances and hope that refused to die. When she finished the Rachmaninoff and moved into the Chopin, she heard someone in the audience sob quietly. When she attacked the Beethoven with everything she had, the energy in the room shifted, became electric. People leaned forward in their seats, completely absorbed. And when she began her father's composition, that gentle melody he'd written for her mother before Elena was born, she felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who'd ever been dismissed or overlooked or told they weren't good enough. This was about resilience, about refusing to let circumstances define you, about finding your voice even when the world tries to silence you. The final notes faded away. Elena lifted her hands from the keys and sat perfectly still, not ready for the moment to end. The audience erupted. Not polite applause, but a standing ovation that shook the rafters. People were crying, shouting, clapping until their hands must have hurt. The noise washed over Elena like a wave, overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. She stood and turned to the audience, bowing. Tears streamed down her face, but she was smiling. Really smiling. Maybe for the first time in 6 years. Beatrice was on her feet in the front row, using her cane to steady herself, her face wet with tears. Chef Laurent was clapping so hard he looked like he might hurt himself. Theodore was wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. And throughout the audience, strangers who'd become invested in her story were celebrating with her. Sharing this moment of triumph, Elena bowed again and again, accepting flowers that stagehands brought out, waving to the crowd. But her eyes kept returning to the empty seat in the very front row. The one Beatrice had left vacant on purpose. The one that would have been her father's. She couldn't see him, but she felt him. In the music. In the moment. In the journey that had brought her here. Finally, after 5 curtain calls, Elena walked off stage. Beatrice was waiting in the wings, and Elena collapsed into her arms, sobbing with relief and joy and exhaustion. You did it, Beatrice said, holding her tight. Oh, sweetheart, you did it. We did it, Elena corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. Without all of you. The others crowded around, hugging her, congratulating her, laughing and crying together. Someone popped champagne. Someone else started talking about the after-party. But Elena just stood there in the middle of them all, these people who'd saved her life and felt grateful. 9 months ago, she'd walked into a restaurant and offered to play for dinner. She'd been hungry and desperate and invisible. Tonight, she'd played Carnegie Hall. Tomorrow, there would be reviews and interviews and decisions to make about her future. But right now, in this moment, she was exactly where she needed to be. Surrounded by love, filled with music, finally truly home. Later that night, back in the guest room at Beatrice's apartment that had become her room, Elena sat on the bed holding her father's metronome. She wound it up and let it tick, that steady rhythm that had marked so many hours of practice when she was young. She thought about the girl who'd stood outside that restaurant 9 months ago. That girl had been broken but not defeated, hungry but not hollow, lost but not hopeless. That girl had been brave enough to ask for help, even when it meant risking humiliation. Elena owed her everything. She set the metronome on the nightstand and lay down, listening to its steady beat. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new possibilities. But tonight she let herself rest. Let herself feel proud. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was exactly who her father had always told her she could be. Not average, not worthless, not invisible, just Elena, a pianist, a survivor, a daughter carrying on her father's legacy in her own way. And that was more than enough.